I'm sorry, I just want to add one more thing to this video, and it's not about what causes the pain, it's about that you're feeling pain in the end, sort of like the satisfaction thing. It only matters that you're satisfied in the end. It doesn't matter how much you satisfied or that what you use to satisfy or what it is that you're satisfying. It's a matter of being satisfied, completely comfortable. Being in a complete state of comfort is really just one side. It's one feeling. It's a feeling of taking away all the deprivation, and it's just one feeling of feeling like you're satisfied and taking away all these negatives. No tensions left. You're feeling satisfied, but the satisfaction, complete satisfaction, takes away from anything to begin with. So if you're completely satisfied, you're dead in the end, pretty much, because without any kind of deprivation, you're not going to experience anything that means anything. So yeah, there's nothing to satisfy. You're not living by its very nature. You're always going to be satisfying. Well, that's the problem with life, and the problem with life isn't the idea that once you have nothing to worry about, then there's no problem. It's that you can't disqualify, because there's always going to be problems, because life is a problem. If you're living, you're having problems. The only time you're not having problems is when you're dead. There's never going to be a time in your life where you're not having a problem. If you're having a problem, so if you're not having a problem and you're thinking about all these things, that becomes the problem. So yeah, and back to the masochism thing, it only matters what makes you, what causes, it only matters that you're feeling some kind of pain in the end. So if you find a nail shoved in your foot, or you find a brain aneurysm, psychoses, or a broken leg, or any kind of physical or psychological ailment, and in a way psychoses is in a way contradicting the idea, because psychoses by its very nature is unpleasant experiencing that. So you can say it is. It's a matter of being honest and semantics and things like that, and describing situations precisely, and describing a situation such as painful and not painful, and using the words right without really confusing yourself and describing to someone else. If you don't understand exactly what you're saying, and you say it, and then someone might misinterpret it, and they may not entirely understand and interpret it in their own way, and it almost confuses. You're thinking of something but not saying it right, and then they think of something completely different based on the thing that you didn't even know you're really saying. So that can become a problem as well. So yeah. So it's a matter of what causes the pain. It doesn't matter what causes the pain. I keep saying it. It doesn't matter what causes the pain. It's a matter of that you're feeling pain in the end. So if you find a nail shoved in your foot and you find it pleasurable, that's by its very nature pleasurable to you, and you find and you want more. That's by its very nature. If you find and you want more, wanting more, meaning that it's pleasurable, you want more. And say you don't want more because it's against your principles, because then it becomes painful and almost adds pain, like guilt or something, to doing something, so it takes away from it. So you have guilt, and that prevents you from wanting to do it, so you'll feel some negative in the gratification of feeling something, so it only adds more negative to this gratification that you're feeling. I like the idea of, I want to have a kid so he can experience the joys of life and things like that. And and the same people are saying, almost in an example using, the same people are saying that, then you're going to die and it's not going to matter anymore. But the same people also say that you're going to go to heaven, there's going to be an afterlife, but nothing matters anymore. You're going to forget this, but there's an afterlife and you're going to remember it, but you're not going to remember it. But I want to bring him in to experience it, but you're going to die someday and it's not going to mean anything. So yeah, I want to bring him in to enjoy life so that when he dies, he won't experience anything and it won't mean anything anymore. It means something, but all you're doing in bringing someone into existence is giving them some kind of deprivation to have to fill. So, yeah, that's all you're doing when you're bringing someone to existence, is you're making sure that they can feel the enjoyment based on the deprivation, only for it to not mean anything from their perception anymore once they die, and it ends up meaning nothing, but it means something because you caused them to exist, and since you caused them to exist, it's gonna mean something because you allowed it to mean something. You allowed some other thing to be subjected to the life game, to the crude forces that are controlling the controlling the very nature. And the only thing that's not is the perception, the awareness that we have, the conscious sentient awareness, and experiencing negatives and things like that. I might make this its own video because it's going on long enough. I don't know. So, yes. Masochism. It only matters that you're feeling pain, and by its very nature it comes down to semantics and explaining things correctly about having you find a nail pleasurable, and by definition you want more, so you want more and you feels good, and disregarding anything like by principle or anything like that, you want it more, so you want it more, and you can almost but then you have things like psychological inhibitions that would prevent you from wanting it, so it only adds to the negative that you would experience by having this added negative weight that's preventing you from wanting to do it, but also prevents you and makes you feel better about yourself for preventing it, but also you want to fill a gap by fulfilling this thing. It's about trying to control these mechanisms and all these emotions and whatever it may be to almost equalize. And obviously I go back to the idea that it's about trying to minimize the amount of negative that you feel to compensate for the positive. Or try your best to compensate, because what's the point when you're just satisfying, and once you're satisfied it doesn't really mean anything to the end. Obviously you feel satisfaction for a while, but it's about being satisfied and not what satisfies it. And why go through a greater negative when that's the whole life game is prefaced on, just to get a greater satisfaction by when the end is about satisfaction. And if you go through a if you have to go here to here as opposed to here, it's better to stay here to here as opposed to here, because it's about minimizing the negative. Because all in the end, once you satisfy the negative by going to a positive, it's about satisfying that. And once you're satisfied, it's all really the same thing. About getting the satisfaction and relieving the tension, because you're going to go right back to the same thing all over again. Wow, this video has gone in a completely different direction, hasn't it? So, yes, so masochism, by its very nature, it's about explaining and using words, and you're describing it as something you want more. You find it pleasurable, so by its very nature and description, wanting something happen again, or liking it, or finding it enjoyable based on some satisfaction you either get in the end, like a burn from a workout, or from the expectation of something like that, or the very process of it happening, like that. You like the nail going into your foot as opposed to the nail going into your foot, which would lead to some kind of satisfaction, like cutting yourself, like the satisfaction of feeling like you've gratified yourself in some way, release some tension, other than releasing the tension in the act itself, or releasing the tension by the effect of the act of itself. So it's about feeling the act based on the nail going in afterwards, like the burn of a workout, like feeling the satisfaction and putting it onto the idea of feeling the satisfaction, putting the idea of the satisfaction in the end onto like the burn of a workout, applying it to the burn itself, and the expectation of getting some more. Or it's about finding the burn itself satisfying, like by a physical feeling in and of itself being satisfying. By its very nature, it's not suffering, and that's the thing. It doesn't matter what causes you to suffer; it's matter that you're suffering or in pain. And so if you don't find it painful, I guess that's the distinction. Suffering, feeling in a negative state of mind where you don't want it to continue, that's the very nature of the preface of suffering, is you don't want it to continue anymore. And that's by the very nature of describing the mechanism by which that's working. So if you find the burn pleasurable, which I wouldn't necessarily say is you're just applying it to that psychological, where you're applying the end goal and applying it to the gratification by way of the satisfaction by applying it to the burn, and then moving that on and making it feel better because you feel like the ends justify the means, and it helps you feel good and it pushes you through it. But you're still feeling pain, sort of like I said in the earlier example that I talked about with the obviously you can only do so much. You need to build up energy to get back to the deprivation to satisfy the end goal, which is obviously based on this deprivation of the burn to begin with. It's based on the deprivation that you're going to get that satisfaction in the end anyway. So it doesn't matter. Once again, I'm going to go over this. It doesn't matter what causes the suffering. It's about suffering. I think is a better distinction, because you can say pain, like a negative sharp sensation could be considered pain, and then you find that pleasurable. But I guess it's a distinction between suffering and not suffering, and taking away that suffering. And by its very nature, you're not suffering if you're enjoying it, if you're pleasurable, if you find some satisfaction in it. But the pains can sometimes lead to a gain by the tension, which based on the tension that you're trying to relieve some end goal, like the burn, like I said again. That can be painful, but the satisfaction makes it pleasurable, and succeeding and getting to the goal where you feel like it's going to compensate for it. And the goal that expectation, anticipation can make it pleasurable. The experience in and of itself can lead over and fade over into another experience and make that experience pleasurable based on just by proxy, because you feel like it's going to satisfy in the end, that it makes this experience satisfying like leading up to it. So it's satisfying and it's pleasurable. But it's painful leading up to it. But it's about the suffering, and it doesn't matter what causes you to this pain or suffering. It's a matter of that you're suffering, and by its very nature, describing suffering is when you want it to stop. And if you want it to stop, just find something that makes you want it to stop, the pain, and then that leads to the very definition of pain and things like that, than suffering. So it's a matter of not wanting it anymore, and that's the preface of the idea of suffering, is that you don't want it anymore. You want it to discontinue. Just find something you wouldn't want done, and I mean, you can try to find pleasure in just about anything, but that doesn't mean it's, yeah, you can work yourself up to getting used to things, but it causes pain, and you have to go through all that process to get used to something. You have to just to make it easier on yourself, when you can have just not have done it to begin with, or made it easier to begin with, as opposed to building yourself up just so it could be easier for you. So you have to go through something to get to somewhere, no matter what. So it's either not go through it, automatically get through it, or have it build up. So you have to go through all this build up and pain and getting over and over just for the satisfaction in the end. So you're gonna have to give some to get some in the end, no matter what. You're always going to compensate. It's always going to find some way. And just because you can apply some equilibrium where you're going to get what you get, you're going to get what you give, doesn't mean there's an equilibrium in this world. And I'm just sort of trying to tie all these ideas together. So yeah, there's not some equilibrium just because you get what you give usually, because there's sometimes unsatisfying experiences. You can't apply it. It's not something mechanism that you can apply to this universe. It's more projection, and that's all you're doing is projecting some kind of equilibrium when that's beyond the mechanism of the world that we're living in right now. When it comes to that mechanism, equilibrium in the world that we're living in, just the right amount of people died, just the right amount of people did this or that. Well, says who? Says you, based on your projection of the idea that something's happening for some kind of reason, and equilibrium's working out. The suffering caused by these amount of deaths is equalized, and it's a zero-sum game. You're obviously going through the deaths, and bringing someone to this world causes more suffering, and you're only compensating by trying to get as much pleasure out of the suffering experience as possible in compensation for that. So it's a matter of semantics and describing pain and masochism and things like that, and it's nothing more, nothing less. So you're experiencing pain or suffering, and it's not pain if you're finding some enjoyment out of it, even though by distinction you can find it painful, but find it pleasurable by way of the satisfaction you might get out of it in the end, or the process itself by its very nature is pleasurable. And then if that's the case, then it's not suffering, because suffering is by its very nature something that you don't want. And the preface of this game is suffering and moving forward and compensating for that suffering by trying to clean up some of that mess or satisfying some of that desire. And it's not always, in a way, equal and opposite compensation when it comes to the negative, the deprived negative, and satisfying it by way of some kind of positive. Or positive. I mean, a positive still exists by way of a relative position of being in a negative, but there's no positive beyond a zero other than satisfying that. You can be relative to the negative that you were in before, you can be in a positive state. It still exists. There's still that scale, but the scale is on a negative scale. It's from the zero is the max, and the negative can go on. But how bad can it get? That goes back to that question. And the willingness to let go or things like that. So that's obviously something to think about. And anyway, so that's all I wanted to say. So I think I made my points clear enough. So thank you, and until next time, bye.